Hi, I'm J.E. Prazzi. I am a speculative fiction author, writer of the Malfunction Trilogy and the Raven Tree Society, and the acquisitions editor for Phoenix Fiction Writers. Today we are doing a book chat on Lord of the Rings. I have two great friends, fellow PFW members joining me, Beth Wangler and E.B. Dawson. And today we're going to be talking a spoiler-filled discussion about the Lord of the Rings trilogy and every book associated. So if you somehow have not watched it before now, you probably don't want to join us for this. But yeah, so we're going to talk about it this week from a reader perspective, and then next week, if we don't have everything blow up in our face again, we're going to do it from a author perspective. So if you guys are writers, you'll want to stick around for that. So Bethany, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Beth Wangler. I am an author of the fairy tale The Weaver's Blessing and of the fantasy saga The Firstborn's Legacy, as well as the short story The Word Thrower. And I'm also the art director for PFW, or coordinator. One of those.
Master, Sensei. And I'm E.B. Dawson, science fiction and fantasy writer. My two main series are the Creation of Jack series and the Lost Empire series, and I'm also the editor-in-chief at the Phoenix Fiction Writers.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I am very, very excited to have these girls on here. We are all like sold out in love with Lord of the Rings, so it's going to be a great discussion. So yeah, let's kind of start off just talking about what was your experience reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. How old were you? What feelings did it bring out? What was it like?
So I think I was a senior in high school my first time. I had never really heard of it. We weren't a big fantasy family. And even though I read a crazy amount, I just never experienced it. And then my sister's best friend brought over the DVDs and was showing her the movies. And I was like, what is this you're watching? So I sat down and we watched the movies and I was like, wait, these are books too? So I read it and instantly was in love. And now I'm obsessed.
Yeah, so my family didn't grow up with it either. Like my parents, I don't think had ever read them. And when the movies came out, my older brother and sister were like curious about them, so they went to see them with my dad, and so then they kind of started introducing them to the rest of us. But when I was in 8th grade, I think, I have my original copies here. Someone gave me the books. Look, they're so beautiful and worn. Well
I have those
loved.
same exact ones. They're with my mom right now.
Except I don't know why the first one has a picture from the third one, because this is clearly when Faramir captures Frodo. That's all I have to say about that. Anyway, so a friend of mine gave me the books. So I saw the movies first, and then I read the books, and it was like I just fell in love with them. There's so much more in them, and the richness and the depth of it was just. Yeah, so I think I probably read them 8th, 9th grade, like during that year was the first read through, and I've read them several times since then.
Yeah, I think I pretty much have the same experience. My sister was the first one to watch them, came back from the movie theater just raving about them. And after that, I didn't get to watch it till I was a little bit older. I watched the first and the second one, and then before the third one came out, binged through the trilogy. And by that time, like we had all the extended editions. We sat down as a family and watched all the extended editions and watched all the extras, like every single extra on there. We I read through Lord of the Rings every year for like 6 years, and then I read the Silmarillion, and then I read The Hobbit, and it was just like excessive. And I had interacted. I heard of The Hobbit before then. It was read at the elementary school that our mission ran, and I was there. You know, I was homeschooled, so I was there for one day. So I had heard of The Hobbit, and I was really surprised to realize that they were the same thing. So yeah, it was like in the course of a few years, I went from not knowing it existed to being like obsessive about it.
It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting looking back, one of my junior high friends had pictures of Orlando Bloom all over her binder, and it was him as Legolas, and I just didn't know what that meant. I was like, she really likes this guy.
There's this random girly looking guy that's just everywhere.
I don't know why. His hair is so long. It's very strange.
I had heard of The Hobbit when I was younger too, and because someone was reading it in their class, and I was like, "What?" They said something about them having big hairy feet, and I was just like, "That's weird." And then, because we were in New Guinea when they were doing some of the filming in New Zealand, and I vaguely remember hearing like they're filming this huge thing in New Zealand and it's taking like all this time, and I was just like, and later I connected and was like, oh, it's not Lord of the Rings. We should have hopped down and over and seen it. But
I have to admit, The Hobbit was my first fan fiction, and I like to say it was Star Wars, but I remember after reading in the elementary school when I had the first few chapters introduced to me, I think it was chapter like 1 and 2 we read. I went home and I started writing a story about this little furball who lived in a hole, and I didn't know anything else about the book. Like I didn't have access to it, and so he went on a balloon trip across the mountains to with a whole bunch of dwarves, and that was. But yeah, so
love
I
it.
guess I really can say The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is
There you
the
go.
beginning of my writing journey
There
there.
you go. That's good. Love it.
So what is it about the trilogy that you guys love so much?
There's so much. I think I really love the history in it. I'm a history nerd, I'm a history teacher, and I love how, like, everywhere you go, it's like there's so much backstory to this world, and the Silmarillion is phenomenal because of that. And it's just, yeah, everything has a rich background, and even when Frodo and everybody's traveling across Middle Earth, it's like it's lived in. It wasn't just brand new created for the story. There's a
Yeah.
past to it. And then I love the themes. There are so many beautiful themes in this story. Things like friendship, which like there's so much about friendship, and I feel like we don't focus on what a powerful force friendship can be as much in stories nowadays. But I love that. And like themes like sacrifice and greed and pride. And like there's just more. The longer I look at it, the more depth there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's such a richness to everything in the world and the cultures, and that you feel like it's a real place, as soon as you step into it, and if you're interested in any of those things at all, which my family, we grew up around linguists and anthropologists, and so like having that, and I love history too. Having the depth behind everything, I think, and the characters, like there's part of it that's so relatable and the themes that are so relatable, but then at the same time it's so very like ethereal and it's so different from our world that you kind of want to escape there, but you don't, at the same time you feel very much involved in the journey and the characters. I love too Tolkien's writing, which I feel like, and it's interesting to watch now that I'm getting old. No, it's interesting to watch this next generation. I feel, and maybe this is how everyone has always felt, but I feel like it's harder for this next generation to connect to Tolkien's writing, and maybe that's just those people I notice more than the others.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I love it. It's, you don't find books written that way anymore, or not very often, and just the language that he uses is beautiful, and the time that he takes to establish the story, you feel like you've lived a whole journey, and it's well worth it. It's
Yes.
not just a quick trip, it's like a life experience. And that's why you can read it every single year, and a lot of people do read the whole thing every single year, and you find new things. And as I've grown older, I go back and read this, different parts stick out to me, and I'm like, I don't remember that scene. And
Yeah.
it's just so rich that then it becomes like an old friend, and it kind of grows with you as you read, which is something really unique.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. No, that all those things are so true. There's so much And now that I've lived in the world a little bit, I've read it so many times, and I know the history, and I know more about Tolkien himself. I can see where those themes came from, and how they unfolded out of him. But when I was younger, just experiencing that with that blind, just jumping into the story, I think outside of the Bible, Lord of the Rings is the most influential in my life as far as my spiritual growth and my emotional maturity. I remember, being a teenager, my formative years in a lot of ways, reading these books and reading these themes about darkness and hope, and especially in the final book, the layers of meaning with the hope in the darkest places. And I remember Eowyn was my hero. I wanted to be her, because everything she said, it was like me. I was like, yes, that's me. I'm not the woman who's gonna stay in the kitchen and now I'm an Annie. But but yeah, those themes are so powerful, even though they seem relatively simplistic because they've been done again and again in fantasy now. But they've been done again and again because he set it up and he kicked it off. So, what are some of your favorite scenes from the book? Some of your favorites in general, favorite scenes, favorite characters, favorites.
I love, one of the ones I do love is Tom Bombadil.
Me
And
too.
and it was so fun to read because there's nothing of him in the movies, and I was like, what is this? But and there's a good chunk of it, and I think like part of me understands why they took him out of the films. And I mean, the films do a great job of driving the main story and not stopping along the way, for because otherwise it would have been 10 hours. Well, it is 10 hours, it would have been like 20 hours long. So, but at the same time, I feel like people who've never read the books really miss out on that aspect, because it's just, along their journey, even though it's early on in their journey, like Tom's like this beacon of hope and safety, and there's something it's just so different about him, that was just like kind of enchanting. And I just really enjoyed that whole scene.
He's the only one not affected by the ring.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so weird. I still don't understand it.
It's like his age and his wisdom. It's like there's things in this world even greater than the darkness, almost. You know what I mean? Like, and it makes you look at things in perspective. Like, because to Frodo and all them, it's like this is the end of everything. But to Tom Bombadil, it's like, I've seen it all, almost. You know what I mean? And sometimes I feel like you meet people like that in real life, and you kind of feel safe around them because they just don't get swayed by. But on the other hand, there was always that, oh, come on, you Tom Bombadil, you need to take the ring because it doesn't affect you.
I feel like even though those scenes, Tom Bombadil and then later the Barrows, even though those scenes aren't necessarily important to the story as a whole, they kind of feel like this like hint of a secret to me. Like there's something bigger going on that he's just like, this is important in ways that you will never understand. But here, let me just give you a hint of something much broader out there. And I always love reading those because I feel like I'm getting a glimpse behind the curtain of something that's happening,
Yeah. So that's one of mine.
Yeah, I love that too. You mentioned Eowyn earlier, Jill. Eowyn, like anything with Eowyn in it is a favorite, but I especially love her convalescence after she gets injured, and then when she it's really long for her to heal, and it's because her heart needs to heal as well as her body. And I love noticing that, and how the lies she's been around and the things she's been surrounded by really affected her, and Tolkien acknowledges that, and then lets other people help her heal. And that's when she and Faramir get to know each other, which is awesome.
Such a good
Faramir's
scene.
another favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I love Faramir. But
Faramir is top of my list.
I love the houses of healing in general, and there's multiple characters in there, and that's when there's that prophecy about Aragorn and the king being a healer, and he comes in and he's the one
Yes.
with the Ephelis, and then how like he has this really sweet interaction with Mary that's one of my favorite in the whole book,
Aw.
where he's like being kind of sarcastic but like really, anyway, it's really sweet. But that just that whole sequence after the battle, there's like several things that happen in Houses of Healing that I just love, and Eowyn's one of them, but there's a couple others there that are really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so good. And I loved when Aragorn like finally accepts his lineage and it's like, "Yep, I can't run from this anymore, so I probably have run from it too long to begin with, and now I'm
Yeah.
gonna do this." And it's such a cool moment of character growth because we've seen how much he doesn't want to take this path, but
Mm-hmm.
now because of the needs of other people, he's going to put aside what he wants.
Yeah. It's, Aragorn is, he's such a complex character
Mm-hmm.
in that he seems so straightforward, and he really is. You know, he's exactly as you see him, and yet not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's got all this like depth of character, but he's so on task. He takes care of what needs to be taken care of, and I just love that about him. That you know he feels so real, and that that's the way a lot of people are in our lives. That you know you see a certain side of them, but you know there's more going on. You might never get to see it. So I feel like he's such an awesome character. I think the best scene in all cinema, if we're talking about the movies, and I it's so powerful in the books too, is the ride of the Rohirrim
Mm-hmm.
in the third book. That moment when they like rush into battle. I don't know what it is, but every single time it gives me the chills.
Yeah,
Every
it's
single
pretty
time.
amazing.
So epic.
It's pretty great. I remember seeing it first in theaters, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh!" It
Yep.
is,
Oh,
The music swells,
yeah,
and yeah, and
it's
I feel like
gorgeous.
there are so many scenes in the books that are so underrated. You know, people
Mm-hmm.
complain about those, the ending all the time, how it's dragged down so
Oh
long. I
yeah,
actually really love that.
I love the
But you know, like
ending.
amazing.
Hobbiton.
That's on my list too. Is like there's a good chunk of the Return of the King that is the aftermath and all the stuff that happens after, and I love it. I love those are some of my favorite scenes of how what happens as they return from Mordor, and then the hobbits as they go home, and just like all that. I think I don't know. I love those are some of my favorite scenes.
Yeah,
Yeah, because all along you've been seeing how this affects the entire world, and
Yeah.
now you get to see, like, yes, it affected the entire world, and here's how all of what they've done, like,
And
the
it's
yeah,
effect that's
it's
had.
just nice after all the warfare and battle to kind of hang with the characters a little longer and even see like the little things like Legolas and Gimli go off, to see the caves or something, and there's just those little pieces that and promises kind of that were made earlier in the book, and you see them fulfilled, and then it's really cool to see like the friendships, how they keep up within the Fellowship, and who goes to visit who, and things like that. That you kind of see it play out. So then it in your head you can kind of imagine how they lived afterwards. So
yeah.
I enjoy that.
And it's,
Yeah.
I feel like the Lord of the Rings in general, and for people who have looked into Tolkien's life, and I know they're doing a movie about him soon, which I'm really excited
Oh
about.
yeah.
I actually have a biography about him that I wanted to read before this, but didn't get the chance to. But he fought in World War. I want to say it was one, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it was one of the World Wars. I
I.
know this
Mm-hmm.
until I have to say it, but knowing, I believe it was World War One,
I think
knowing
so.
what he went through and what he had to come back to,
Mm-hmm.
like reading that, understanding that he's coming to this from this mentality of a soldier. And the war
Mm-hmm.
isn't over when you come back home.
Mm-hmm.
You still
Mm.
have to fight it in your mind, and you definitely see that with Frodo.
Mm-hmm.
And you still have to fight the repercussions of it, of the people who didn't come home, and the damage. So I feel like it was really important that we had Hobbiton was this safe little place that nothing could touch.
Mm-hmm.
And in the movies, they come back and like no one is touched by it.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the experience of these soldiers coming back from the war. They
Yeah.
came home and home was torn to pieces. And, the thing they were longing for on the battlefield, they walk back home and everything is gone. And I feel like that's such an important glimpse into Tolkien's mind there. And such an important thing for all of us, in that you can't. I think they mention it in the movies as well, the extended version. You can't go back. There is no going back. So you may have this idea of, I'm going to go back home and everything's going to be like it was when I was a child, and it doesn't matter. It's not going to be that way ever again. I think that's why I love those scenes so much.
Yeah, I think in the movies they show, like, even though Hobbiton is the same, the Shire hasn't changed. Like, the characters have changed enough that it's not the same for them.
Yeah.
But I loved in the book how they go back and the Shire has also been touched by the war. And you see that and see, like, even in this one safe haven, like, there's still a fight that has to be done there.
Yeah.
I see the value of both endings, because I think the movie one's sadder because it's like no one can ever understand what they went through, and it's so isolating to them to come back and have no one to remember. But that's often how life is too. Like, there are times when it's like people don't understand because you chose to go out and fight the battles and they chose to stay, and they never had to face that. But in the books, I think it's just beautiful because it goes full circle. It's like after all that, they get to come and fight for what's most important to them, which is the Shire, and then and they see success and victory, and they get to rebuild it with their people, and there's something really, really satisfying to that for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But another very favorite scene of mine that I have to mention is the chase of Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli when they chase the orcs to save Merry and Pippin, and I found it in the book, and there's a quote that's one of my all-time favorites, and when Aragorn says, "We shall all need the endurance of dwarves, but come, with hope or without hope, we will follow the trail of our enemies, and woe to them if we prove the swifter." And to me, I always said it's one of the most beautiful, like. And how he says that, it's like, no matter how this turns out, even if we don't have hope, we're going to try. And like, they get so exhausted. They're just running and running to save their friends. I love it so much.
It is. It's so epic.
And they did a pretty good job in the movie with all those shots. Oh my gosh.
Speaking of Merry and Pippin, I love when they have the, like, growing competition in Big Forest. They're like, oh, this water makes us grow taller. Haha, now I'm taller than you.
So funny. Oh my goodness.
I love how there's still that levity that gets mixed in, even in the dark times.
Yeah. It's the comedic characters, and yet Merry and Pippin have so much depth of their own. I think probably a little bit more so in the books than in the movies, but definitely in both they have their dark places. So, yep. All right, well, we've discussed the things we love, and Beth kind of mentioned how people don't, how Lord of the Rings seems to be kind of falling out of favor with people, and I definitely have seen that, especially with fantasy writers, the way they talk about Lord of the Rings. There's kind of like our generation and before that still have this kind of like awe about it, and then there's the younger generations who are like, well, it's racist and it's misogynistic and it esteems war and it's like so stuck in the Middle Ages and all this stuff like that. So looking at Lord of the Rings as being the father of fantasy and just classics in general, do you think there's still a place? Do you think that Lord of the Rings still has something, and I know that you guys do, but to today's people, like, how is it still relevant? How is it still important?
I think it's so tempting to want to be like, oh, I want all books to be custom written for me, and to be exactly what I'm used to, and to say all the opinions that I agree with. And that's kind of like, that's not super healthy for us, first of all, as people. Like, that, how we grow is we read that books that are different from us, and if they're written in the past, they're gonna have different mindsets. They're gonna be relevant to the people back there and what they were exposed to and the ideas that they're trying to express. And so you have to kind of put yourself out of yourself and immerse yourself into someone else's mind, and and that's when you can really enjoy it, and that's when I think you grow a lot as a person when you do that. And when you do, you see, that's when you start making, oh, there is so much that's relevant to me. It's just encased in a different, it's just encased differently than I'm used to. But there's so much in there that, yeah, I mean, I don't see that it could ever be irrelevant, because there's so much just about, humanity and the different choices we make. And like Bethany was talking about, the light and darkness and hope and greed and envy, all of that, it's not like that's ever going to go out of fashion. And no, it doesn't look like our modern world today. And yes, if it was written today, it might have been written differently at parts, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value in itself either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think a lot of the criticisms are actually oversimplifications of
Yeah,
Lord of the
I
Rings,
agree
and
with
don't
that too.
actually look and examine what Tolkien's actually saying,
Yeah.
because a lot of things like glorification of war, he's not glorifying it at all.
Mm-hmm.
He's showing the true horrors of
Mm-hmm.
war and how it really affects people. Um, and while he does have few women characters, the ones that are there aren't just like eye candy. They
Mm-hmm.
actually have a role in the story. Um, Things like that I think, one, either we don't go into it with the intention of actually figuring out what he was saying, more just with our modern lens of, oh, he only has like three characters who are female, so therefore he's sexist. Or we've looked at texts that have imitated him too much
Mm-hmm.
and taken their interpretation of the themes as what he was representing,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the case. I think that part of the reaction against him could also be wanting more diversity in fantasy, and I think that's a really valid thing. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that what we can learn from Tolkien is his story was very different from stories that were written at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is part of why we love it so much, because it was new, because he tried new things, and because he like used his passions for linguistics to build this amazing story. So I think that we can do the same thing and keep seeking to innovate and come up with new stories that use our interests and our passions. And stories for readers, it's a conversation we're having with different people. So, like Beth was saying, we can read Tolkien and try to gain insight from what he was saying and the experiences he had and the way he viewed the world. And we can use that and also read books by other people with different worldviews and see how do different authors present these ideas, what actually is true, and use that to help us better understand our world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are both very valid. And looking at it from today, we have this heap of fantasy that has mimicked Tolkien, and we look back at Tolkien as being the founder of that. And I think that's really unfair to place that responsibility
Mm-hmm.
on him instead of on the people who are imitating him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think also, like, just as Beth was saying, that um, we need to be able to diversify our reading tastes and look at older books and put them in context to their time. I think that having the ability to accept a book for what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and this is especially true in classics. I think a lot of times I almost view classics as kind of this time machine where
Mm-hmm.
you get a glimpse into the mindset of a person in that time period. And I think with Lord of the Rings and Tolkien in particular, because I have such a passion and I love not just the books, but the man behind the books. I get so angry when people are like, he was racist and he was sexist, because they're not putting in context what with not only the time period but with what he went through. Um, so I remember I was reading the second book, um, the Two Towers, at the same time as I was listening to Hardcore History, which is an amazing history podcast. Everyone should go listen to it. But they were talking about the First World War, and they were describing the battlegrounds in the First World War, and they're describing how the bombs would create these pits, And then when it rained, those pits would fill with water, and men would fall down and get sucked in, and animals would fall down and get sucked in, and you couldn't get them out. So the bodies would putrefy and make the water putrid and poisonous. And it would create these fumes as you walk through. And when you're reading the land coming up to Mordor, that is exactly how it's described. These pits filled with poisonous putrid water and fumes coming up. And it also made me think of the orcs, which are described as dark-skinned. So here we say they're dark-skinned, so therefore he's saying that black people are evil. Whereas what we're not understanding is that when he was in battle, they're in trench warfare, there's these people climbing up out of the mud to come kill him. They're covered in mud, and just like the orcs and the Uruk-hai are like born out of dirt and just like these destroyed human beings, that is what he saw coming to attack him. So when he's writing to overcome his PTSD. He's writing to overcome these things and teaching us what he knows as a wise man who's been through this. And that's how his experience fell out on the page. So I don't think that we can be like looking back at him and accusing him of racism when we have this much more valid explanation for what could possibly have been in his imagination. And the same thing with the women. You know, he wasn't going into war with women. That's not the friendship he experienced. So therefore, why would he write a book about friendship in war with a whole bunch of women? That's not what he experienced. He experienced the brotherhood of battle. So I feel like being able to put a book in context, not only with the time period, but with the people as much as possible who wrote them, I think really kind of gives us the right understanding before passing a judgment really quickly. And I don't think that says that means we can't critique the impact that it's had on the culture. But I think we need to be careful putting that back on Tolkien and being he's a racist and he's a misogynist because that's how we view it in these days, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure he had blind spots because we all do. We're human, you know what I mean? But there's a super popular phrase. Everyone's like, don't judge me till you walked a mile in my shoes. Well, you can't do that for these authors either. Like, you have to put yourself out and give them the benefit of the doubt and try to understand the context, like you said. Otherwise, you're just being judgmental. So it's important, I agree, to understand their context and where they come from. But, yeah, even without all that, I think when you look at the text speaks for itself so strongly. You know what I mean? That when you, So anyway, I think they're amazing and valid and encouraging and they're great. So
if you're ever feeling hopeless or like this battle against darkness or evil isn't working, like Lord of the Rings is a really great encouragement.
The eagles are coming.
Yes, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
Yes. There's such incredible encouragement. So kind of the last question, we'll kind of wrap it up here. So we've talked about how Lord of the Rings has impacted the world, and we kind of mentioned this a little bit in the beginning, but how has Lord of the Rings impacted you personally as a reader?
Well, it revealed to me that there's fantasy, that exists. So that has been really influential, as you heard, that I write a lot of fantasy.
Yes. We'll get to talk about that next week. I'm really excited.
Yay.
I had read a little fantasy before, but I think it opened to a whole new level of fantasy. Like, I had read the Chronicles of Narnia and mostly children's fantasy, probably. I'd read a little bit of children's fantasy.
Yeah.
I think also it and other classics for me helped me really develop as a reader an appreciation for stories that take their time and that don't like dive head first into the middle of a story, but actually have an exposition and let you get to know the characters. And that, so as a reader, I really appreciate stories that do that, which seems to be kind of falling out of favor, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm like always saying that. I'm like, oh, I love stories that take their time. I think it introduced me to more like epic fantasy. But that being said, now I'm like super picky because I found it's like the exception. I don't like a lot of epic fantasy, but I love the Lord of the Rings. But I think I mean, when it challenged my even my vocabulary and in good ways. It's such a, you know what I mean. It's such a and to learn how to be able to read even difficult text. I think it really increased my comprehension as a reader, which I appreciate that too. I think a lot of books. I would love to see more writers, you know, really studying and honing the craft. I feel like the way that they used to. I feel sad sometimes. I feel like our English language is, you know, it's natural for language to change over time, but sometimes I feel like, you know, I wish authors put more work into the prose and of their work. I mean, it depends on your genre, obviously, but and then personally, I think it's just such an encouragement. It's been such an encouragement through so many times in my life. I think the courage, like all the characters, so many admirable characters who you're like, oh my goodness, I'm
Yes.
like, some of them you're like, I am not that strong, but I wish that I could be. And others you're like, oh, they're like me, like they're afraid sometimes, but they push. There's so much to inspire and to relate to, and and even like to, you know, aspire to. Of like, I want to become that person who, when everything is so black and dark, like Sam, he thinks of Frodo first, and is like, oh, if that water's
Yes.
poisonous, I'm gonna drink it first. Like that's his instinct. It's not like after they're exhausted and they're starving, that's like the first thing he still thinks of. And you see that, and it makes you just it resonates of like, do I do that? You could just so easy to apply, I think, of wanting to be those types of people. And sometimes it helps me to look around and be like, okay, I have struggles in my life, but they're not that bad, and I can overcome them too. I can be
Yes.
brave. So
Yes. I think it's also helped me to recognize the value in the simplicity of life
mm,
and like drinking tea and eating nice food and having a cozy house. Those can be really wonderful things, and it's okay to enjoy them and not to feel like, oh, I have to go out and find adventure. I have to be
mm,
the best and do all these glorious things. There's like how wonderful the Shire
mm.
is like has helped me realize it's okay to be simple sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the strongest themes that comes through in Tolkien's writing in general, both in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, maybe a little bit less so in the Silmarillion, but the Silmarillion's kind of like big picture stuff. But his love for the hobbits in particular is that they're small people, and even the smallest person can change the
Mm,
course of the world.
mm,
Um, and it's not just that the smallest person can change the course of the world, but the smallest person doing the small things
mm,
can. It wasn't nothing that any of the hobbits did was that incredible. It was, you know, walking a long distance or going without food or water or, you know,
mm,
it,
Yes.
yeah, and it wasn't, you know, we have Aragorn who's, you know, slaying monsters, and we have Legolas who's, you know, the prince of the woodland realm and like dancing over top the snow to go fetch the sun. The best line ever. um, but then you have the hobbits who are just they're simple. Um, they're doing simple things. They're doing the best they can, and they're not trying to be anything more, but they're just doing their part. And I think definitely as someone, you know, growing up as a missionary kid and growing up with that young person mindset of how you need to go forth and change the world and do amazing big things, I think it was really impactful for me to be able to read those lessons of the simple things of how my mom made dinner for us every single night and made sure that if there wasn't enough meat, she went without it so that we could have it, or that it was healthy, or, you know, my dad sitting down and reading the Bible to us, or, you know, now that I'm an adult, getting up and going to work and doing one thing after another to the best of my ability and not thinking so much about, oh, I need to do the biggest and the best. I just need to do what's set before me in the best way possible. And that's what changes the world. Um, And I think that was something really powerful for me, really encouraging to me, being that kind of AOM person who's like, I need to do great things, and if I don't do great things, I might as well die. Um, to look at AOM and be like, I look more like her, but I need to be a Frodo and just, one step after another. Yeah, it's really, really powerful messages there that I don't think are going to go away anytime soon just because times are changing.
Yes, yeah. Gandalf has that quote about, yeah, the little acts are the most that push back the darkness the most, or whatever. That's so
Mm-hmm.
good. It's yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts?
I need to read them again.
Yes,
I
I was
know.
thinking
That's
that
my
too.
final thought.
We need to set up a marathon Lord of the Rings weekend or something.
Reading session
For
or
my
watching.
25th birthday, I did a marathon of the extended editions in
Oh
one
my
day.
goodness.
Oh,
It was a life-changing experience.
I'm like,
I
it
did
gets
that with my cousins
exhausting.
once.
Oh,
We almost made it.
oh my goodness.
I had
Yeah, they're
scheduled it
long.
out very structured and
Okay.
knew, like, we start here, we take these breaks then. This is when we eat.
That's awesome.
Oh.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and close this out. Next week, join us. We're going to be talking about Lord of the Rings from a writer perspective. So you got a few hints of our writerly talk, but all of us are really into craft and classics, and it's going to be an awesome conversation. I'm really excited for it. So, yes, if you have been following along at all, down below in the description are my links for everything. I'm going to include links for E.B. Dawson and for Beth Wangler and for, since we're all PFW members, for the Phoenix fiction stuff as well. Make sure to go check everyone out. This month, on the 23rd, the second episode of the Raven Tree Society is coming out. I actually have something really exciting coming in the mail that I'm probably going to be sharing with you guys. Do a little unboxing, and hopefully it will actually work this time. um, so yeah, that's the big news for this month. Bethany, you want to kind of let us know what you have going on, and then Beth, you can kind of close us out with, just let us know what's going on with you and what you want us to check out.
Yeah, sure. I have social media, Facebook, Beth Wangler, Twitter and Instagram, Beth_Wangler. This month I am releasing my third short story in the Steward stories, which are part of my Firstborn's Legacy saga. It's called Aurelia the Nightwalker, and I'm very excited about it. And there's a talking raccoon in it, and that makes me very happy. So that'll be free for newsletter subscribers or available on Amazon.
So exciting. Yes. You can find me on Twitter at E.B. Dawson Writing. What else is happening with me? I will most likely have a short story coming out later this month called Gifted. The date on that is not set in stone, but it's a superhero fantasy, which is new for me, and I really enjoy it. And then I have, Keep Your Eyes Peeled, because I have several more short stories coming and a novel, so I'd love for you to check those out.
Yes, yes. And both of these girls are very, very talented writers. So I'm very proud to be in PFW with them and to get to know them. So yes, come back next week. And yeah, we're gonna leave you now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.